Hi, Masha.
My first question for today is very important. Have you ever seen The Big Lebowski?
Of course, I've seen The Big Lebowski. Obviously.
Okay, so then you know that in the movie, John Goodman's character, Walter Sobchak, I think, converted to Judaism while married to his now ex wife, and even after their split, he still refuses to roll on the Shabbos. So, my real question for today is about conversion.
Oh,
Since Judaism is not a faith based religion, why do people choose to convert?
that's a really good question. So, so to go back a little bit, uh, in the Torah, and even in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, there really isn't a lot about conversion. It doesn't seem to be a thing even that people really can do. It's the Israelites are a tribe, more precisely a clan, and it's about descent. If you're descended from an Israelite, you're an Israelite. If you're not, you're not. And it doesn't matter who you marry. In that scenario, it seems that when if a non-Israelite marries an Israelite, the children are uncomplicatedly Israelites. So there doesn't seem to be anything really going on there.
Mhm.
And it's only in the rabbinic era, so 2,000 years ago, under the Romans, that the rabbis come up with two things. Number one, the idea that Jewish identity is passed through the mother.
Mhm.
And number two, the idea that you can convert, that you can become Jewish, which neither of which seemed to be around before that. And we don't know a lot about why they did that. There's all sorts of theories, most of which have been proven wrong. But they did create the possibility that people could convert to Judaism. And you can imagine that as a minority under the Roman Empire with no rights, it's not going to be a real popular thing to convert to Judaism. But apparently, there were at least some people who wanted to become Jewish. Uh, really, conversion has remained a really small thing in Judaism throughout the centuries. And part of that is because, unlike Christianity and Islam, there was no imperative within the Jewish worldview for people to convert, right? There's not, there is this idea, to best of my understanding, in Islam and Christianity, while there have been, different attitudes towards people who are not part of the religion, there has been an idea that, ideally, everybody would be Christian or everybody would be Muslim. That would be the best way to fulfill God's purpose in the world. And in Judaism, the idea has been ideally people would leave the Jews alone and let Jews be Jews, and everybody could be what they were, and that's fine. So there's no imperative. It's not a Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. It doesn't try to get converts, and in fact, traditionally there was an idea that converts should be discouraged. And this idea that people, even I encounter with potential converts now that say, oh, don't you have to refuse me 3 times? So that's a popular belief, and apparently a thing that people would do is to say no 3 times before somebody could be accepted for conversion, because you really want to make sure they really want to do it. Why would people want to do that? So it's since Judaism, as you said, it's not a faith-based religion. It's not something people wake up and said, I had a faith experience and God told me to be Jewish. That's not usually what happens. Instead, Judaism is a religion that's really based on practice, and the idea that the practices are kind of a technology that allows you to lead a meaningful life. And some people are really attracted by that technology, right? By these practices, mitzvot, commandments, the holidays, Shabbat, these things that, regardless of what your beliefs might be, that these might be things that are valuable. And of course, a lot of people who are born Jewish see Judaism that way, as that you can say that, oh, the idea of resting one day out of 7, that seems like a good idea. And the idea that you might then have a community of people who all do that together and support each other in doing that, that seems like that could work. So a lot of the people who, and I teach classes for people who are interested in converting to Judaism, so I meet a lot of converts, and actually there has been in America an increase in conversion over the last few years, and especially this year. I've heard from a lot of my colleagues, a lot of more people want to become Jewish. And what I hear from people who want to become Jewish is First of all, one of the things that really attracts them to Judaism is, in fact, the idea that faith is a sort of an open question within Jews. There's no dogma about faith that you must subscribe to in order to become Jewish. So that is attractive to some people who felt in various religious traditions they might have been raised that there was a pressure that you must believe this about God or that about God, or even believe in God. Whereas in Judaism, it's open. You can be a good Jew, as we say, without a belief in God. The other thing that really tends to attract people is the idea that Judaism is a questioning religion. That it's based, especially the Judaism we practice now, is really based on the ancient rabbis, and the ancient rabbis were all about argument and multiple answers and questioning everything. And that mode of religious existence is attractive to some people who felt that in the religious traditions, again, in which they might have been raised, there was not openness to questioning. There was a dogma that must be accepted, and that questioning that was punished sometimes by the people in charge. And then a lot of people who want to become Jewish are really interested in community. Community is it's a difficult thing to come by in America, increasingly, and religious community is one of the ways that people connect to each other. And Jewish communities tend to have a pretty close relationship people have to each other. Partly that's, again, about being a minority community that needs to support itself and support each other. But it provides an entree. If somebody who is Jewish moves to a town and they don't know anybody, going to a synagogue is a really great way to get to know people. And people tend to be extremely welcoming to people, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their ethnicity or their race. We hope that's always the case in Jewish communities, but increasingly it is. That being Jewish is an entree to a kind of social connection and a kind of community building that people often find really attractive. Mm-hmm. And of course, can't forget to say that especially in the last, say, 50 to 75 years, when in the United States in particular, anti-Semitism, or at least the blatant effects of anti-Semitism, have decreased a lot, so that it's not a disability for somebody to become Jewish. That's also been a greatly encouraging fact for people to come to Jewish. It's not, nothing's going to happen to you if you become Jewish. I mean, you are identifying with a community that does, certainly there's anti-Semitism out there, and there's been terrible anti-Semitic attacks, but it's viewed differently than it was, say, 200 years ago, where there really was this belief that people, why would you do that? Why would you put this on yourself to join this hated community? And I have to also say that with the people I've worked with, almost always I bring up to people, look, you've moved down this path and you're interested in joining the Jewish people. This is a time of actually rising anti-Semitism in the United States, and we saw Pittsburgh and Poway and these horrible attacks. How does that make you feel about becoming Jewish? And I would say 100% of the people that I ask that question should say, oh, it makes me want to become Jewish more. Like, the fact that people might attack the Jewish community strengthens my commitment to wanting to be part of that community. So that's a pretty good sign. People might be ready for conversion. And I'll also say, I can't stop talking, but I would say that the other thing is I tend to resist the language of conversion, because conversion tends to feel like it's like a light switch, like you turn it off, you turn it on, you turn it off. And mostly that's not how it is when people are becoming Jewish. The language I usually use with people is, well, it's more like a tipping point. Like, you feel more Jewish than not. That's the time to do the conversion ritual. And people often live in Jewish community for a while before they feel ready to do that.
And it's very important to have one day off that you don't have to go bowling. Really compelling reason.
It is really true. It really is true that it's easier to take that day off when you have a religious reason for doing it than when you're just like, hey, you know what? Tuesdays? I don't do anything on Tuesdays. Sorry. it's pretty rough, and Americans tend to be, despite all sorts of things that Americans have around religion and secularism, Americans tend to be really respectful of religious reasons for not doing something,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to if you just said, "Oh, hey, I don't like working on Fridays, so I don't." People would be like, "Yeah, you're just a lazy bum." But if you say, "Oh, on Saturdays I don't work 'cause it's a religious thing," people are like, "Oh, okay, sure." Um, it's so that is helpful if you want to have at least one day where you don't have to check your email. I love that very much about Shabbat.
Okay, Rabbi, it's time for Is This Kosher?
I'm ready. Throw it to me.
Okay, number one, blue cheese.
Oh, blue cheese. Blue cheese is usually made with rennet, and so it comes from animals. So it's usually not kosher. There is blue cheese that is not. It's made with vegetable enzymes, and I have been lucky enough to occasionally find that and be able to eat blue cheese. But overwhelmingly, the answer is no.
Not a big loss.
Yeah,
Oreo
says you.
says me, yes. Okay, what about Oreos?
Oreos, famously in my childhood, were not kosher because there was lard in that white stuff in the middle, and we had to subsist on Hydrox cookies, which just were not the same. But then, like sometime in my teenagerhood, they changed and it became kosher. It's actually marked kosher now, so we can eat all of the Oreos we want. Thank God.
Thank God. Okay, what about printed matzah?
Printed matzah?
You're not familiar.
No.
It's matzah that has been screen printed to have some image on it.
Wow, I've never heard of such a thing. I mean, if the dye or the ink they were using was not from an animal source, then it probably is okay. Very strange. I don't know if it would be kosher for Passover. That would be a more complicated question, but certainly, yeah. Usually ink is from, in fact, vegetable sources or mineral sources, so it's usually not a problem. It's a question of whether you would want to eat the ink is a completely different question.
Fair point. Okay, what about caviar?
Caviar. Yeah, not, no. One shouldn't be eating that anyway. Wrong.
Fair point. Okay, and last but not least, bacon flavored chips.
This was an object of some controversy, especially in the 70s.
Hmm.
The idea that, when people first started coming out with fake bacon bits,
Mm-hmm.
and should you eat something that is imitating something that's forbidden? My personal opinion is that it's totally fine as long as it doesn't actually come from an animal source, and there's nothing wrong with it. In the same way that there's nothing wrong with going to, a vegetarian Chinese restaurant and ordering the pork. Because this is just imitated foods. It's not that we're supposed to deprive ourselves, like, for technical reasons of things that we want to eat. It's that we're supposed to be following these things that say don't eat bacon. So you don't eat pig. That's not pig. We can eat it.
Sounds good. Hi, Rabbi. My question for the ancients today is what would they say about voting? Or, more broadly put, what would they say about participating in civil society and civil government?
Two very different questions. Well, people have tried a lot to find democracy and voting in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, and pretty hard to find. There's not a lot of idea about voting. In fact, kind of the opposite. There is this sort of idea that, especially in the Torah, that God is in charge, and even if the majority of the people say that the prophet is wrong, too bad, because God has a big scepter on the scale. The one thing maybe that you can see in there is the idea of the consent of the governed, only in the sense that God does ask the people to consent. God gives them the law and says, do you consent? And they say yes. So maybe you have that in there. But in general, voting, not there. And there's not a lot of belief in democracy because the will of the people is sometimes wrong. Kind of like the founding fathers of the United States who created the Electoral College. So, but the idea of participating in civil society, on the other hand, is something the rabbis do talk about, because there are people, apparently, in rabbinic times, meaning in Roman times, who say, look, the Roman government is corrupt. Roman civil society is corrupt. We should just stay far away from all that stuff. No, don't get involved. Keep ourselves pure. And the rabbis, for the most part, say, nope. You actually should be participating in civil society as much as we can, because it controls so many aspects of our lives. So if we want good and the right to prevail, we can't do that by sitting it out, right? So they encourage going to civic functions, even sometimes on Shabbat, if it has the capacity to affect society. So in that sense, I think they would be supportive of the idea of voting. I mean, certainly they would think, wait a minute, you're telling us that Jews get to have a say in what the civil government does? That is awesome. You guys should go do that. Because they generally did not get such input. So I think while there is a lot in rabbinic literature over the centuries about trying to support the state, because to the extent that the state can protect the Jews, that's a good thing. I think they also would say, to the extent that we have the ability to shape the state to be an agent for moral good, we have an obligation to do that. So that when I have seen, some churches in our neighborhood have had put up signs recently that say things like, voting is our sacred duty. I might not phrase it in exactly that way, but voting could be an agent toward pushing forward the mitzvot, pushing forward the ideals of Torah, and therefore we should do it. And I think in the United States, if you look at, I often refer to this, that if you look at the instruments that allow us to fulfill obligations that are in Torah, like, for example, feeding the hungry. How can we feed the hungry in the United States? Well, the scope of hunger is so great in the United States that we actually can't do it as individuals. And we actually can't do it as civic organizations or synagogues or, it needs a national effort in order to do that. So in that sense, we have to be trying to put pressure on our national government through voting and through other ways, through advocacy, to get that done. Because if there's, as there have been in recent years, 40, 50 million Americans who don't have enough to eat, nobody's going to be able to fulfill that need other than the federal government. That's what it's for. And so we have to try to make the government an instrument of moral will, as sometimes discouraging and frustrating as that is, since the government does not always, or even maybe even mostly, operate that way. If there's that potential, we should be exercising our the power that we do have. And I'll say that, Jews have traditionally voted in pretty high numbers, which is one of the reasons that you do see politicians, depending on your point of view, pandering or appealing to the Jewish vote for, in their attitudes towards Israel or some other issue. When you think, wait, Jews are like 2% of the population, who cares? Why would it be worth it to them? But I think it's because Jews vote. Just as we know that religious communities in general vote at higher rates than other folks. So that's the reason that religion becomes an issue in elections and again, gives us some power.
So the moral of the story is, for our two viewers, vote.
Both of you should go and vote. Actually, maybe you should stay home, vote by mail, whatever you need to do.
Whatever you need to do.
Yeah, we're talking to both of you.
Vote.
I think I have a perfect record.
Okay, Rabbi. Are you ready?
I am ready to lose.
I chose a kind of easy one. So think about the holiday that is coming up.
There's a holiday coming up?
The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottom of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God.
Jonah.
I had to.
That is a good one. I do love the Jonah story is a wonderful one. And this is Jonah's song when he's in the belly of the whale. It's a lovely moment of someone defying God and yet still getting saved by God. That's what's so amazing about it. It's like, this is the thing that we have this translation, I think, that I read to the kids when they were little, where God speaks to Jonah and says, go to Nineveh, and Jonah hightails it down to the dock and gets on a boat to get out of there because he doesn't want to go to Nineveh. And in the book it said, Jonah was running away from God. And the kids would say, oh, that's so silly. How could he think that he could run away from God? I'm like, yeah, dumb move. God's only there. You're going to not find God over here. But anyway, finally Jonah does it.
So can you tell me what chapter it is in? There are only 4.
There are only 4, so it should be easy. I'm going to guess 2.
Yay!
Ah! Oh my gosh.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I had a 25% chance. And I was pretty sure it wasn't in 4.